Welcome to Fusion 5 Radio with your host, Fusion 5 CEO, Rainee Busby.
Okay, so scorecards and metrics, they're not quite as intimidating as they sound. So what I'm going to do is help you all to understand what they are and what they mean and how you can best use them in your personal life, your business life. We all need some sort of metrics to be able to track how things are going. I mean, you track your bank balance, you track your debt, you have lots of different numbers within your personal life that you track. So it's going to be very similar, whether it's in a church, it's a business, no matter what it is, you need to have a set of numbers to track the activity, because the activity is telling us that we're heading in the right direction. So, there's an old saying, we can only manage what we can measure. And if we can't measure it, then it's very difficult for us to set a path and be able to make sure that we're heading in the right direction at the right speed to get where we need to be. So I think first of all, to start out is, let's talk a little bit about what is a scorecard. So scorecards have had a lot of different terms over time. They're also referred to as key performance indicators, KPIs. You'll hear that a lot. They might refer to it as a dashboard. Also kind of measurements, all kinds of different terms. But the easiest way for you to understand is it's really activity-based statistics. So I did 20 of those today. I'm going to need to be doing 25 of those next week in order to keep us on track to be able to do 50 by the end of our 3-month period. That would be a fine example of what's kind of going on there and what we need to start looking at. So how do scorecards and metrics really help us? So I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of take a step back and talk about, it makes sure we're on track for success. But in a business area, we use a lot of metrics around sales. So we know we have to talk to so many people to be able to set so many appointments. So like 20 people to set 10 appointments, to have 5 people that are really interested and maybe close 2 deals. So that would be an example. If you're putting on an event, you may want to track the number of attendees to your event. You may want to say, how satisfied were those attendees? So maybe you give them an evaluation form at the end, and you ask them to kind of say, hey, did you like our program? How can we improve it? What type of venue would you like to see in the future? So we're capturing statistics or data that we'll use in our scorecard as we start to build things going forward. One of the nice things about scorecard, and we use an analogy in EOS that says, pretend like you're on an island somewhere and you can't see what's going on in your business or what's going on in your church, but you need to have certain numbers to give you a peace of mind that you can continue to stay on vacation on that island, for example. And so that's how we get people to kind of start thinking about it, say, okay, if I needed to know that things were on track, what were some of those really important numbers that are going to make a difference to me? It enables that person to act quickly. So if they're expecting the numbers to be around 5 or 10 and all of a sudden they drop down to 3, then they can jump in and say, something happened. We need to figure out what it is and get things back on track. And so that's really a very important piece of it as well. The ability to predict the future based on past events or metrics. So that's going to be important. We recommend that you look at your trend of data over a 13-week period. If you track it weekly, 13-month period if you do it monthly, and then at least do about 2 or 3 years annual tracking, because we want to see trends or cycles. So businesses will have peaks and valleys. It's like if people are during the summer, a lot of vacation activity, and then it kind of school's back in session. That kind of slows down a little bit. So that's very important. Also, increased accountability. So making sure that people know how they're going to be measured for success, and then we want to hold them accountable to those numbers. So that's important. So we want to make sure that people know what's expected of them. And here's an interesting story at Bethlehem Steel Company way back in the early 1900s, and they had an underperforming plant, right? So they forged steel, made steel parts. And they couldn't figure out, the manager could not figure out why his plant was underperforming compared to the other ones. And so the man who owned the steel company at the time went out to the plant, and they do what they call heats. And this is where we heat a big billet or a big piece of steel to be able to forge it into a part or whatever they were making. And so he went out there with a big piece of chalk and wrote the number 6 on the floor, right as the guys were walking in and out of the building. And they're all like, what's this number 6? And the group that was just leaving their shift, they said, oh, well, this means this is how many heats we did tonight. And so the shift coming in said, oh, well, if they did 6, I bet we can do 7. And so next, when the shift come back, here they are, number 7 is now drawn. And so they kept playing that game. So what we did is we created a little bit of fun competition, which helped them to improve their throughput. So that's an example of the importance of tracking a number, even one simple number that you write on the floor. So I talked about the importance of tracking it weekly or monthly. So make sure you make a decision as to how it's going to be tracked. Make sure the data is easy to get to, because if this is very difficult to find the numbers, you're like, oh my gosh, it's going to take me 3 hours just to come up with what we need to track. That's not going to be worth it. So we want to make sure the numbers are easy to get to, easy to collect. Here's some of the characteristics that happens when we're not using scorecards or metrics, right? We kind of a little bit about flying blind is a good way to say it. And there is a little cute little pilot. So, the pilot comes on the radio and says, well, folks, we're making great time. We're not really sure where we're going. Gauges aren't working, but hey, we're going to get there in lightning speed. So you're sitting there going, okay, that's a fine example of I need gauges, I need direction, I need to know how much fuel we have. I mean, a pilot has a lot of metrics and scorecards that they keep track of while they're flying the airplane. And they use checklists as well, even though they've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. So that's kind of a cute little story. Some best practices around scorecards and metrics. So we talked about the accountability, right? So we have people that are accountable for the reporting and pulling it together. So somebody needs to say, I'll track all the metrics, and somebody else says, okay, I'll give you these 2 metrics every week that you can add. So we consolidate it so that we can review it as a leadership team. It should be reviewed on a regular basis. So weekly, monthly, I say absolutely weekly, and then let your monthlies come up as they apply. It evolves over time. So what metrics we're tracking today may not be the same metrics we're tracking maybe a month from now, because we're getting smarter and better, and we may find that we're pretty comfortable with those metrics. Maybe we want to switch over to another area that's having some challenges. So we'll create metrics around the tasks related to that. We tell you should have between 5 and 15 different metrics for a company. For an individual, probably 2 to 3. So you don't want to get over, zealous with all these metrics, because they can kind of drive you a little bit crazy. But being able to track a small number, but the critical ones, that's what's most important, tracking the right ones. And as I mentioned, looking at the statistics over time. So we want to look at that 13-week trending, 13-month trending. And finally, here's a few examples of things you can use in business, some examples of different scorecards and metrics. So how about the number of errors we had in shipping? That's going to tell us that we've got a problem in shipping. If we usually have maybe 1 error a month, and all of a sudden we have 5 errors a month, then we want to be able to say, oh my gosh, what's going on? Let's get in there and figure it out. So we can put a little SWAT team in there. Number of customers with problems or complaints. Or parishioners with problems or complaints. Maybe they didn't like the way the program was handled, or something they didn't like the music. Who knows what it is? But being able to track those, so we know if we start to see the number increasing, then we need to take action. Number of employees who are taking sick days. That means there's probably something going on. If all of a sudden, typically you have 1 a month, and now we're up to 6 a month. Something's happened. So we need to look in there and see if there's activity we need to do. Number of warranty claims, scrap metal, if you have certain scraps, like if you build widgets and these widgets aren't coming out right, so we can't sell them. If that number increases, that could mean that the machine is off track and needs to be, reset or whatever, or maybe some maintenance needs to be done. And so those are just some examples of the importance of tracking your scorecard and your metrics. You can do it at home as well. Scorecard, think of it as your child's report card. If you have children, that's their scorecard. That helps you as a parent know that they're on track with their grades. So you may get midterm report cards, and it says, here's what all the grades are, knowing that's got to feed into your semester report cards, and then finally the end of year report card. So that's a fine example of how you use scorecards in your everyday life.
Hello, friends. If you're enjoying our program, Fusion 5 Radio with Rainee Busby, Let us know by going to fusion5radio.com and emailing us. Rainee wants to encourage you to write to her with any questions or comments that you may have. That web address again is fusion5radio.com. fusion5radio.com. Rainee wants to help you be more productive in business and ministry by sharing with you each week how to get your life back through simple, practical steps. fusion5radio.com. Write to us. Join us next week. Be blessed.